Welcome to In Their Shoes by Seanchoíche. I'm Gaff.
And I'm Becks. We're here to help people connect through the power of shared storytelling.
In this podcast, we invite two people to tell a story about their life. Instead of reading their own story, they'll swap and they'll read each other's as if it was their own.
After both stories are finished, we will dive into the real questions to be asked, feelings that came up, and more moments that have maybe never been shared before.
Come with us as we experience walking in each other's shoes and immersing ourselves in each other's stories. This episode is brought to you by Mubi, a curated streaming service dedicated to elevating great cinema from around the globe. From iconic directors to emerging auteurs, there's always something new to discover.
With Mubi, each and every film is hand-selected so you can explore incredible movies, streaming anytime, anywhere.
Now streaming in the UK and Ireland, The Worst Person in the World, a 2021 film by Joachim Trier. Joachim Trier's Oscar-nominated Gem embraces with open arms the messiness of life at a crossroad. Winner of Cannes Best Actress Award for her star-making turn, the effervescent Renate Reinsve commands the screen and our hearts with her ravishing vivacity. Have you seen The Worst Person in the World?
I have seen it. It was actually my favourite film last year that I saw.
Same. I actually, funnily enough, the first time I went to watch it, it's a Norwegian movie, and I went to watch it in Amsterdam when I lived there, forgetting to specify that I wanted to see the English subtitled version.
I've done that so many times.
God. Anyone who lives in a country where they don't speak English as a native language, you might have dealt with that when you've gone to see an international movie as well. But The Worst Person in the World, it's a movie that I watch pretty much twice a year. It's like my church. Because, I mean, it's a movie that deals with being single. It's a movie that deals with being in relationships and being in love, putting yourself first, putting others first. And she's such a flawed character. And, like, obviously, you know, The Worst Person in the World is the name of the movie, which is obviously something maybe a lot of the people that have suffered the consequences of her actions would say about her behind her back. But when you actually watch her and her character development, you're like, yeah, she's just like me or you or any of us.
Well, that's it. And she thinks she's the worst person in the world. I liked the whole point in it around connection. So the fact that she keeps that connection with her long-term partner throughout it, but it just changes like what that connection is. And then also, like, I watch it every year the same as you. And actually just watching it a year later, I realised the way I watched it was different. So like things I took from it.
Same.
Right. So things have, like, I realised how young she was and how much pressure there was on her to like have kids and then also having that older partner. How much like the differences in the dynamic of his friends as well and what's expected of her. And like she's not the worst person. She's just a person of her age, which is funny too, you know.
It's genius.
And to stream the best of cinema, you can try Mubi free for 30 days at mubi.com/Seanchoíche.
That's mubi.com/SEANCHOICHE for a whole month of great cinema for free. I think if it is true that there are as many minds as there are heads, then there are as many kinds of love as there are hearts. This is a quote by the fictional character Anna Karenina in the novel Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. And I think it depicts exactly what love is. The power of love is just so ubiquitous. It's something that has affected all of us in different ways, shapes, forms, colours, memories, moments, feelings. It touches on the heart in ways that are beyond comprehension, beyond story. And it's hard to sum up in a 45-minute podcast, but we're going to give it a go.
We're going to try.
We're going to try our best.
Your little poet there, I loved it.
Sure,
that was beautiful little riff there on what love is.
You'd swear I haven't hosted a load of nights revolving around that theme before. Love is a central theme of Seanchoíche. It's a theme that we have done in 4 different continents at this stage, where we've hosted nights with around 10 people per night where they've shared stories about love. And I think it was a theme that I myself was quite reluctant to include in the matrix of themes that we do Seanchoíche around, because that I was reluctant to include in the matrix of themes that, you know, we've included in Seanchoíche's rollout over the past 2 years. Well, I think it's because, you know, myself, like, I think I've always had a very reductive approach to love. You know, I think society puts us under pressure to, you know, subscribe to this pinnacle image of love, which is, romantic partnership, monogamous partnership, mum and dad and the kids. And, I think particularly as a queer person, when you feel like that's something that you can't access and then suddenly you get access to it in a new form, which is something that has never really been exposed to you on television or in media growing up in the early 2000s and late 90s, then it's just really difficult to navigate that. And, I think like over the past 10 years, as I've started, experiencing romantic relationships and experiencing love and experiencing both, unrequited and requited love, but always quite unconventional and complicated love because I love a challenge. It's really opened me up to the fact that this quote, which would have been written in the 1870s, I think. Now, I just want to make sure that my facts are correct there, but I think Anna Karenina was written in, I'm going to tell you exactly when. Anna Karenina was written in 1886. So the fact that there is a quote from a book like that is still so present today, and if anything is more celebrated today when we look at so many different types of love, whether it's polyamorous love or long distance love, unconventional types of love where nothing is linear, queer love, and also just non-romantic platonic love. I think that right now this quote couldn't be more pertinent and more relevant.
Well, it's timeless. Love is timeless. It's the thing that we've all experienced as a would you say foundational emotion. It's just, as you said, like society puts a wrapper around what it should be. But like on the Seanchoíche, one of the best stories I think people still speak about on that theme was this girl's love for salt.
Yes, oh my god, she was amazing. Fergus is in here with us today and he agrees. He was there for that night as well. I think he spoke on that night, if I'm not mistaken, as well. But yeah, so this girl, she is a geologist. She, I think, has just gotten her PhD in geology, and I don't want to give too much away in case someone IDs her. But it was a night where she spoke for 10 minutes about her love for salt. And it was one of the coolest things I think anyone has sat through, because it was, well, now she might contest this, but it was speaking about an inanimate object, or maybe in her eyes, salt is very animate. But it was just so cool because like that was her whole story, and her whole piece was all about her love for salt and the various different things that salt has done for her in her life. The first 5 people that spoke that night spoke about death. Which completely surprised me, because I kind of thought love was going to be all people talking about romantic love, and at that time I was going through I was probably going through a heartache of some description, or maybe rejecting love that was coming my way.
Yeah.
Because I've kind of been running away from love for the past couple of years. And I remember just being quite pleasantly surprised in a very morbid sense that most people were actually talking about like death. People were talking about love in the context of funerals, the Irish funeral, how much they love Irish funerals. Like it was just so classic Ireland. Yeah. But then as we've done love in different countries, like we've done love in South Africa, we've done it in America, we've done it in Australia, we've done it in the Netherlands, and obviously the UK and Ireland. And it's just been this consistent like deconstruction of what love is actually in reality versus what it's kind of portrayed as.
Well, that is a great way to sort of get into this, because I think that's the whole point of this theme and really tapping into this, is that love can be it's not straightforward, it's not black and white, and there's many different ways to interpret it and many different things to put it in, that, as you say, until you start to experience it and grow up, you're not I guess as exposed to, or you're surprised about it. So we have decided, as you can see, there's no one else in the room today.
Because we have no one to love. No, I'm joking.
Yeah, we've been rejected. So we're going to have to come together and...
dumped.
Yeah, so we thought, as we've been dumped today, that we would actually do the podcast ourselves. And we picked the theme of love. So we're going to share our stories.
Because I love you.
I love you too. That phrase is...
No hetero.
That phrase is like such a thing that I've got used to in the last couple of years, of like saying it to my friends, and it's such a great, like, it's such a beautiful thing to be able to say, and it gives you that, like, again, that like comfort or hit that you are loved beyond a relationship. But the funny thing is, we've talked about all these different facets of love, but you and I have shared stories that we're going to read today that are around romantic love. They are, yeah, not exclusively, but they are led by it, because I do think it is where the head goes first. So I think it's going to be an interesting one. We both actually performed these stories, I'd say about a year and a bit ago. So they're written a bit back. And I was saying reading back on it is quite funny because to me, even since then, the story's evolved. Like, so the way that your view on love or even your experience of love changes the more that you keep evolving as an individual, looking back on those moments. So I can't wait to get into it. I wonder if it's the same in yours.
Well, I'm really curious to hear my story being read again.
Yeah.
Because I've just come out of a really beautiful whirlwindy romance that is kind of like ended on practical terms because we live in different countries and we're not going to see each other.
Oh no, I didn't know this.
I know. I've been kind of processing it myself, but like it's in like we had a really gorgeous discussion where we've just realised that it's a case of right person, wrong time, and wrong place, and that in its sense is actually just quite a nice thing to be able to openly discuss with a partner and realise that you wouldn't want to put them through the torture and torment of the waiting game and the ambiguity and the ambivalence and the not knowing. So disappointing as it is, it's actually fine. You know, like it's tough and it's painful and it's hard, and I think that we all need to lean in those emotions. And I think a lot of us in this, particularly transient, globalized world are falling into these long distance beginning stage situationships, relationships, partnerships, whatever you call it. But you also need to have the respect and admiration and care for someone to know when it's the wrong time to shoot your shot. And that is what we agreed. We were like, if we tried to have a go at this right now, it would ruin things. So
yeah, it's so true.
Put a pin in it.
Yeah. The older I get, the more I realise timing is everything.
Oh,
you used
crucial.
to think when you were younger, if it's right, it's right. Yeah. But that's just so not the case.
It's the practicality.
Yeah.
The practicality kind of underpins it, really. And
Yeah.
I think if you weren't to be practical, and if you were to be like, if we actually tried to have a go at this, we wouldn't see each other for 2 months, which is just not right. It's not what I'm looking for. So, without revealing too much information about this, because I want to be respectful to that partner as well. I am really curious to hear what I sounded like a year and a half ago when I had, been maybe 2 years out of a very damaging heartbreak. By no fault of the other person, just by the fault of my own expectations and my own desires. And I was really closed off to love. Like, I was really closed off to vulnerability. I was very stoic in my partnerships. I kind of tended to go for people who I didn't necessarily fully connect with because I wanted to block things out and I didn't want to reveal my weakest side.
Commitment issues, is that called?
Yeah, avoidant, maybe. Anxious avoidant. I don't know. I'm starting therapy. So, so I'll be curious to hear how he analyses it. But I am curious to know, like, since, my heart has kind of been opened up over the past couple of months and I've learned how to be vulnerable again. And I've reconnected with that side of my heart. I'm buzzing.
You've learned a lot already. And
so.
We're disappointed for you, but everyone's going to be really happy that you're single. So,
I don't know. I don't know if you could put up with this chaotic flyer.
So I'm going to pose that...
Do you want me to read yours out or do you want to read mine out?
Shall I go first because we've just sort of tapped into your... Okay.
We almost did the discussion of ours before.
Okay. Ever since coming out at the ripe age of 19, I have been playing catch up on the 6 previous years of my post-pubescent life, where romance was something that I opted out on, while locked in the closet of internalised homophobic shame and dread. Once I finally did come out, I led myself to believe that I had one goal in life. I have one North Star. I had my eye fixated on one simple, obvious, and surprisingly, excruciatingly difficult objective in the long, arduous mathematical equation that is life, and that goal has been to fall in love. To fall in love with the kind of man that I can trust, the kind of man that I can bring home to mum and dad, the kind of guy I could get a coffee with on a Friday morning before work, who is up for going for a hike up the Dublin mountains on a Saturday morning at leisure best. The kind of man that isn't some guy I met 5 minutes ago down a laneway near Mother. The kind of man whose pocket isn't going off with the all too familiar grinder banjo strum notification every 2 seconds. Forgetting to log off moments before buzzing me into his apartment. The kind of man who knows my name, who knows my friends' names, who has similar interests to me, but also has an independent way of thinking about the world. A guy who's kind to me, who challenges me, who's attracted to me, who respects me, and where this attraction and respect is mutual. My journey as I discovered more about the colourful world of being gay was not the most romantic one. I think I had sex around 15 with around 15 different guys before I ever went on a date. I didn't really think that as a boy destined to become a gay man, I would ever be destined to fall in love. I saw falling in love and being gay as being mutually exclusive entities. I didn't believe that I was worthy of an emotional connection with a guy. I think the barreled up years of silence, secrecy, and repression caused me to never want to expose myself emotionally to anybody else. I didn't want to display any figment of vulnerability or weakness to another guy because I didn't want to expose myself to such feelings. For my first couple of years of self-discovery, I compartmentalised my sexual relationships, mostly hooking up with guys at least 10 years older than me, or who I knew I'd never see again, manufacturing this gulf between me and these men, or these insignificant others. The first date I ever went on, when I was 21 years old, was the first time I actually allowed myself to be emotionally vulnerable to a guy. It was the moment I understood that I could have an emotional connection with someone of the same sex. Needless to say, I poured all my heart out and emotions into this boy, and on the surface, it seemed like a two-way street. He was interested. I had a screenshot of a text he sent me saying that he wanted to share every moment with me, that I read over and over again in the months that followed our first and last date, where he spontaneously kissed me on the street hours before flying back to Lisbon for Christmas, only to never come back to Dublin again, find his stuff home in boxes and starting a relationship with his childhood friend back in Portugal. They're still together. This kind of disappointment and confusion after a date, where you realise that it isn't going to go anywhere in spite of the chemistry appearing to be well and truly there, is something that many of us experience. It's the kind of heartbreak that isn't really a heartbreak, but the sting is still raw. One could argue that it gets easier as you get older, but at the time, it consumed every single moment of my day, my thoughts, and my heart. It was the first time I brushed with love, and it put me off dating for a year. My whole entire learning and discovery about gay romance until meeting the Lisbon letdown, which is what we all call my first date, has been largely influenced by pornography and gay dating apps. Any of the resources that I relied on to learn about love, about mutual compassion, desire, and reciprocal trust and affection between loving partners were largely grounded in this heteronormative narrative that felt alien to me. And instead of assuming that this type of bond was something that I could assess, I subconsciously ruled it out as something that gay men never experience, or at least that it was much rarer novelty for our tribe. Then there were the semblance of love, the extremely emotional but emotionally unavailable guys in my life that lasted more than a month. There were the narcissistic assholes whose narcissism, bravado, and arrogance was something that I mistook for attractive confidence, and whose company my ego relied on for further confidence and validation, only to learn after a few short weeks or months of dating that I was nothing but an ego boost for them, to be dumped for the next best thing in their life, or to be tossed to the side so that they could focus on themselves, or worst of all, because they couldn't shake the fact that they were afraid of hurting me in the future. These semblance of love are also commonly known as fuckboys, wastes of time and disappointments. And of course, there have been the most attractive of all, the flawless types, to whom I throw all my shit at the wall with. The ones with whom I can be 100% myself. The guys with whom I can imagine spending the rest of my life with. The guys whose pillow talk feels like therapy. The one who knows me so well despite spending such little time with me. The guys who mean the world to me. The guys who maybe I did love. Maybe I do love. Maybe I could love. These, of course, are the geographically unavailable types. The guys who are moving to a new city, hemispheres, and time zones apart, days after meeting. The guys who I leave behind as I myself move to a new city. The men who are passing through. The guys who have nothing to lose, with whom I have nothing to lose. The ones that will never work out. The ones that are worth it just for one night. These are the logistical impossible situationships I managed to get myself stuck in. They are equally heart-thrilling and heartbreaking. They come with so many challenges, endless obstacles, too many details, too much excitement, circumstantially not destined for love. This quest to fall in love has been tiresome. It has pierced the heart in so many ways that I am actually just tired, jaded, exhausted. I remember being out for a walk with my friend Dawn, puffing on the last of my rollie, holding back the tears while venting about a relationship which had ended in disappointment. Sighed to her that I had so much love to give in this world and felt that I was receiving none in return. I was not even planning on getting up and speaking tonight, because despite setting the theme of love, I felt that I had nothing to say about love, as I have yet to find it. But then I paused to think for a second about the life I have lived and realised that every single moment that has built out my life these last 27 years has been injected with love. I think about the time my best friend Alex stayed with me for 10 days when I tested positive for COVID 2 days before Christmas, despite testing negative himself, because no one should be forced to spend Christmas alone. I think of my childhood home best friend Anya, who I've known for 15 years, who I rarely see, but when we do see each other, our conversation naturally slots back into place, chatting and catching up as though we saw each other a week ago. I think of when our dear friend Jess from college suddenly lost her beautiful brother. At least 50 of us dotted across the world pitched in to buy her a KitchenAid so she could continue excelling in baking, a hobby that she began to hit the ground running with as a way of coping with grief and loss. Or the time my housemate Ellen stayed with me in the rapid HIV testing clinic one Sunday morning in New York when I had an anxiety attack weeks after having unprotected sex. Who didn't bat an eyelid when I went to the bathroom 16 times, shitting my insides out as my bowels started quite literally beating the living crap out of me with the histrionic stress of potentially testing positive. Obviously, this was way before I knew about the advancements in HIV treatment and U equals U. I know now, through learning from the amazing HIV positive friends that I love, that testing positive would not have been something to get myself in a twist about, but back then it consumed every part of my central nervous system. Even in my ignorance, Ellen stayed by my side. The friends like Ellen who are present, who provide a listening ear, can be the biggest gift of love to someone, even if that someone has STI anxiety-induced IBS. When my mum squeezed my knee the first time I took a flight at the age of 9, when my dad calls me late at night asking if I've decided when I'm coming home next, or whether I got the job I interviewed for, when my brother shows his love for me in the words he chooses not to say, when my sister shows their love for me in the advice I choose not to listen to. I think about the girl at Butler's Cafe who gave me an extra chocolate in Dublin Airport last week when I threw 50 cents in her tip jar and winked at me as she smiled into the cash register. I think of my friends Beth and Turo, who invited me to their beautiful wedding in Greece, having met me once, and who invited me to the pre-wedding holiday for their closest friends after meeting me twice. Introduced me to their closest friends, who then too became some of my closest friends. I think about the teary-eyed faces of friends I've wiped late into the night as I listen to them pour their heart and soul into teacups in various kitchens about lost loves, anxieties, failures, and shattered dreams. I think about the dozens of friends' couches I've crashed on while travelling before catching red-eye flights, or close to hospitals where dying relatives died. I think of the doctor friends who I text when I think I'm going to die. I think about those same friends who respond telling me I'm not going to die. I think of how my sister's best friend sat through a funeral of my cousin because she stumbled upon her family standing outside the church while on her way to a college exam. Choosing to skip said exam and being the most teary-eyed attendee of Helen's funeral, telling us afterwards that she fell in love with Helen's story and confessing that she was actually on her way to a college exam and had no idea when she would be able to resit it. Wow. I think of how I wouldn't have gotten through the past year in Amsterdam without the occasional knee squeeze, hug, or home-cooked meal from my best friend, Yags, without the Epsom salt baths at Aoife and Cody's house when my chest pain kicked in, without the rational, balanced, but equally loving and caring advice from Anna, without the beaming smiles and unwavering positive attitude of Owen. I think of how another one of my best friends, Cleana, lives vicariously through my sex life and probably knows about my sexual escapades more than I do. I think of how during the pandemic, myself and 6 queer friends in my wider friends group from college, including Jeff, here tonight, or was there when this was first written. Found ourselves back in Dublin for 2 years, finding that we all had the same issue in common: loneliness. We each felt we had no one with whom to share these past experiences of trauma, shame, and isolation, experiences only other queer folk would understand, only for these friendships to become 6 of the strongest, most powerful bonds I've ever experienced, forming a group known as my gaggle of gays. I think of the spark I feel when friends meet friends and fall in love with each other. I think of the way when I wake up to text messages from friends, it feels like I'm opening presents on Christmas morning.
Just not voice notes.
Yeah, you leave them for a
Yeah.
while. I spent a lot of time thinking about the love I do have in my life, and I've realised while writing this piece that I've spent a lot of time wallowing over disappointments in my romantic life. I've experienced quite heavy bouts of loneliness and dejection from relationships that haven't worked out, and the endless quest for love has felt harder and harder as I grow older. And while I haven't quite met the gym and coffee clad Mr. Perfect standing waiting for me at the bottom of Ticknock with a flat white in his hand, I have majorly overlooked the boundless currents and layers of love that I do have in my life. I see that everything I know about love is based in the uninhibited love I experience in my friendships, and there is no kind of man at the bottom of Ticknock who can even begin to compete with that kind of love.
Kind of needed that reminder.
Yeah, I mean, how relevant right now.
I know. Yeah.
How did it feel hearing that back?
Like, it's so funny. A month ago, when you and I kind of had said that we were going to do love together, I was like, oh, shit, this is going to feel obsolete and anachronistic because I was wildly blinded by whatever that was. But at the same time, maybe that's this kind of pressure I put on myself as well to not have the same attitude I had when I wrote this.
Yeah.
I think one of the best things that I have is just an unbelievable support system of friends and love. I think it's something that I've always kind of struggled with. It's like, oh, like, why is it so much harder for me to find a romantic relationship when finding platonic relationships is so easy? And I think it's something that a lot of people struggle with. But how lucky am I to be able to do that?
I
To be able
think
to
you
have
are
that?
lucky, and I think you have great friends. But I think the work that you put into trying to find someone that's special for you in that way is still the work you put into finding friends. So you have great friends. Like, not everyone has great friends. Like, you've managed to find that. But also, it's like also okay to acknowledge that like friendships are fucking great, like and necessary. But at the same time, it's not romantic love. Like, you don't wake up with that person. You don't have sex with that person.
Well, sometimes. Sorry, but
Well, like the
yeah, no, not.
you do. You can
Yeah.
have sex with that person, but you know, it's not the intimacy or the life partnership
No.
that like you're looking for in that way that would be consistent. And like not having that or having these little, like, I find, I was saying, like, you know, you have those big relationships that are like big, and then when they break up, like the fall is hard. But like all these little like waves of like disappointments or like good, you know, hope and disappointment is exhausting, as
Yeah,
you
it is
say there.
exhausting.
Like, and so I think it's like actually quite honest just to acknowledge that one too,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
like
Definitely, and like, oh, I don't know. I think I need to stop making life. I think I need to stop doing it like so difficultly. Like when the line about the geographically unavailable boys
yeah.
comes up, I'm like, fucking hell! I actually just did that again, and I also do not want to focus on that like relationship being a bad thing because it's a really good thing, and I also just don't want to focus on that in this podcast because I don't think that's fair on the other person at all. To
Well,
focus on it.
it's relevant because it's new, and
Yeah,
it's the
it's
last
fresh, it's raw.
it's the most recent experience of love that you've had.
Well, not sure if it's love, but like definitely partnership and emotion,
Depends.
vulnerability, whatever love is. What is
Depends
love?
what- yeah, that's what I'm saying. We're not saying here that you loved him because
No.
that's pretty intense, but it is an experience of like trying to understand love, or you know, like opening yourself to the prospect of it.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah.
And I think that's it. Like I said, I did open up to that prospect, and that's a really nice feeling. But it's just funny how like there is a pattern there, of like going for relationships that are long distance and geographically unavailable. I don't know what that is yet. I think it's
You're
also
a man of the world. Like,
That's
it's not
probably it,
like
like,
you're rooted anywhere.
I've never
I think
really
that's the
been
thing.
I've never really been consistent with a living situation.
Yeah.
Even in college, like college was, the first 2 years Dublin, a year in Spain, another year in Dublin. Like it wasn't like I had 4 years of college in one city or anything like that. Like, and then growing up, I was constantly up and down to Dublin from Limerick and going away for the summers and stuff. I was very lucky to be able to do that and be so mobile. But it just does mean that I don't really get very used to a pattern that easily. So yeah.
Well, really, if you think about it, and I always like to, put the shoe on the other foot in a way. You're that to a lot of these people too. You're the geographical unavailable. Have you ever thought about that?
No, I haven't actually.
Yeah.
It's funny as well. I don't know where this comes from, but I always just assume that I'm the one that wants it more.
Yeah.
Which is a funny thing. I don't know if that's just because, is that an Irish thing? Is it a Catholic guilt thing? Is it a subservient, like kind of subjugated queer thing? I don't know. I just constantly.
Yeah, it's a good point actually.
And I also maybe think that I think gay men do experience this level of loneliness a lot, and it's quite intense. And maybe just when you have that sense of partnership and connection, it is that much more of a novelty. Because the gay dating world is just so.
Yeah, let's get into that a little bit.
As in, I don't want to be controversial when I say this, but I definitely find it can be quite easy to fall into a pattern of, using Grindr because that's an app that's very much there. It's available for really, really great sexual connections, and it is also available for romantic connections. Don't get me wrong, I've had romantic partnerships that have come out of Grindr long term.
Yeah.
But because there is that easily accessible sexual transaction, it can often be quite easy to go for that over Hinge, which generally bodes itself more for longer term romance. And then Hinge is there as well, and Hinge can be great and stuff. But then maybe just because so many guys have the option. I also do not want to generalize at all, and I think it's a very gendered thing to even say the boys will be boys. But at the same time, there is a lot of sex and transactional sex in the gay man's dating world, which can sometimes be conflated with emotional transactions.
Yeah.
And, I think sometimes it can be very hard to see the wood from the trees there. And you can maybe rely quite heavily on sexual escapades.
Unless you're in a dogging situation.
Unless you're in a dogging situation. But that's quite funny actually. But there is an element of, you kind of just have to learn to separate the two, I think, and actually really do a little bit of work on yourself and on, finding those emotional connections in the right platforms. And I don't even know what I'm trying to say here.
I think, well, first of all, men are just more comfortable with sexuality. So women aren't, women just going to have sex is quite, not a new thing, but a more publicly spoken about thing, I would say, in recent years. Or there's platforms like Field and stuff now that are more geared towards women too, that was never there before. And also for queer community, in the same way. So I think that is probably where that comes from. And then again, it's really fucking tough to be emotionally vulnerable, but it's very a human need to feel affection or touch or want to have sex. So when you have that as the option, as you say, it is easier and you get your little hits. It's like the little dopamine hit you get from looking at your phone for a like you get. Okay, it helps for a minute, but it's not sustainable. So there is a point where it gets exhausting or you want more. And I think, as we said about timing being everything,
it is key.
Finding someone that's also in that point where they're at a point where they're like, yeah, I want something more and I'm open to that. And if you've not been as open to that in the past, to try and do it even together, even if you're both open to it, but to go through that process. Because at the end of the day, you either stay together or you break up. So that's the options you've got.
Yeah. And I'm just I just think that there is this element of codependency, I think, that maybe queer men feel with one another, because once you've found someone who isn't running away or isn't barreled up with all these feelings of internalized homophobia and kind of the trauma of being in the closet and not being 100% comfortable with the idea of loving another man because they don't know how to, they weren't given the tools to do so. Once you find someone that doesn't have all of those problems, it can just be such a novelty and can be so electrifying. And then it can definitely, for me personally, and I don't want to speak on the behalf of all the people out there who have a similar sexual inclination to mine, but you do kind of feel like ready to just like latch onto that and
Yeah.
really not be able to deal with the possibility of it slipping away from you. And then there's an element maybe of pressure that I definitely put on myself to make this perfect. And when I'm leaving the honeymoon period of a relationship like that, and then things are becoming a little bit more normal, I think my insecurities start trickling up my throat, and I start getting really worried about them not being into me anymore, and them wanting to push me away, and all this kind of stuff. And really, that's not the case. And I think I do I have an issue there where I conflate my self-worth a lot with my romantic partnership outcomes.
I do not think you're the only one there.
I know, I'm definitely not. Have
Like-
you ever done the... Sorry.
Go ahead.
I was about to say, have you ever done 36 questions to ask someone to fall in love? The New York Times.
Gaff, I will say that you know what I'm like. I think I do the 36. I think I wrote the 36 questions. I'm like, yeah, I get very deep very quick with people. I
Yes,
build
so do I.
connections quite quickly. So for me, when I read those, I was like, who's not asking these questions?
I know.
Also, like, your favorite color or something? Like, I'm not really that into that one.
Well, some of the questions are a little bit random. And
Yeah.
then some of them are very existential. And then some of them you can't subtly ask them
Yeah, well, that's what I
because
mean.
you need
It's
to
not
work
like,
on them
yeah.
together. It's like some of them are exercises, they're not questions. Because I was trying in a relationship before to like pepper our relationship and interactions with those questions to see if I could drip feed the falling in love experience into it.
Right.
But then I realized that there were like 4 or 5 questions where it's like, you and your partner now have to sit down and write out. And I was like, fuck's sake, okay, I can't
You're
make
like,
this.
would you like to take this pen and paper?
Yeah.
I really want to take it back to you exploring your sexuality and sort of that being a part of your journey in love too.
Yeah.
You say that, you know, that sort of keeping yourself in the closet for years sort of like kept you away from wanting or thinking about love. Can you give us just a bit more information on that, or just walk us through your journey a bit more?
I think I was just riddled with self-hate and fear of subscribing to this life that I just didn't want. So I didn't want to look it in the eye, and I saw like actually building emotional connection with the man to be almost like succumbing to it, which is such a toxic thing to say now. But that was definitely my attitude back then, and I was just really scared of like actually giving a guy a chance to love me.
Yeah.
And like I even remember like having a really nice, like came out to a guy who was like in my group of friends, and we had a thing, and I ran away from that, and like there were just so many opportunities that I think I just ran away from because I was like, I am not ready to actually accept this. And that's why I chose to like, you know, have sex with strangers in my first time. Like I lost my virginity twice. I lost it to a girl, and then I lost it to a guy. And like, I don't even know the name of the guy who took my virginity. It was a guy from an app. Purposely didn't want to know anything about him. Same with guy number 2, same with guy number 3, same with guy number 4. Yeah, it just went on and on. It's so bad. I mean, is it bad? I don't know if it's bad. It's a very shared experience. I think a lot of gay men have experienced that.
Yeah.
Anonymity.
I think so sorry, what age was it that you came out?
I came out as bi when I was 18, and then I came out as gay when I was 19.
Okay.
I kind of wasn't 100% sure what I was myself for a while. I knew I was into guys, and that's kind of how I started coming out. And it was nice because it all happened around the same time as the marriage equality referendum. And that was like the first time I just heard like, you know, Panty Bliss on the radio and people being heralded for their work as LGBT plus activists. It was the first time I'd heard straight people talking about being queer, you know, like their queer friends, like advocating for queer rights in Ireland. It was the first time I had seen pink washing and rainbow washing, you know, like companies speaking about being queer. And suddenly the whole entire world, I mean, not the whole entire world, but what was my whole entire world, which was mostly Ireland, seemed to be really rallying for my community. And I think that's when I was like, I actually need to open up about this.
How did so you say you came out as bi, which is also like it's actually quite a big thing of the time for you, because a lot of people still are like on the fence with how to even speak to bisexuality.
Bisexual people. Yeah, it's funny. And like, but there's so much bi erasure in this world. And, you know, I think it was a case of me feeling quite guilty when I came out as bi, because I wasn't even 100% sure what I was myself, but I needed to put a label on it. And then over the next like year, once I kind of started figuring out that I actually was not necessarily bisexual, I was like, oh, I feel like this is just going to be such an injustice to the bisexual community. And I even wrote to some bisexual friends being like, here, look, I'm really sorry for using your platform, your community, your sexuality as a stepping stone. And like they all just were like, Gaff, you're like, no, nothing to worry about here. It's not erasure. It's not, you're not discrediting us or anything like that. And actually I've dated a bisexual guy, and you know, it's been so educational for me to understand the bisexual experience and really get my head around it myself. I think, you know, every not to say that my head wasn't around it. I actually did a lot of research on bisexuality when I was kind of identifying as bisexual myself, and I think also because I'd had loving relationships with girls, and I just was so confused as to what that was if it wasn't sexual. But it was sexual. It was just confusing. And I just think it's not black and white.
It's not.
Sexuality is not black and white. It's so it's such a spectrum, which is such a cliche, but it is.
And it can change. I mean, like, I'm bisexual, but like, again, to what extent I've lent into that or not lent into that is something that, like, still I'm like, oh, I don't know, like, you know, and you default to what you know or what feels comfortable, which isn't a lot of the time necessarily what you maybe want, but it's just safe in a way. So that's always something as well that I think, especially at that age, is like, well, if it feels uncomfortable, then is it right?
I know. I remember being in a bar with the guy I was dating who's bisexual, and we were talking to a girl, and like she was like, you know, we didn't know her, we were just getting to know her, and she made some comments. I can't remember what it was, but she was like, oh, like, obviously, you know, because she knew we were a couple, she was like, obviously you guys wouldn't care about that because you're not into girls. And I was like, oh, well, actually, you know, like, let's just call him like Stephen. I was like, Stephen's bi. And she was like, oh, but like, you know, I like, I'm talking about a guy who would be obsessed with me. And I was like, no, but like, Stephen is bi, like, he could be obsessed with you. And she's like, no, but like, you know, I'd want like a straight guy. I'm talking about a straight guy, like, who'd be obsessed with me. And I was like, my God, you're blatantly bi erasing this guy, and this is within the last 12 months, and I just was like, this is despicable. But there is still a huge amount of bi erasure in this world, and it's not fair. But it's also something maybe a lot of people aren't educated enough about or open enough about either. But you know, like, then I came out as gay, and like, you know, I really have embraced that. And even like my best friend Alex, who I mentioned in the story, who basically like stayed with me when I had COVID at Christmas time, even though he didn't have it himself. He was doing an internship in a company that was sponsoring the Pride Parade that year that I came out, and he, like, all the interns were allowed march in their parade and, you know, go to the drinks afterwards. It was like a big Dublin Pride Parade sponsored by this company, and Alex basically was like, oh, Gaff, like, do you want to come with? Like, it'd be really lovely for you to experience your first Pride Parade with me. And he's like a straight ally, like, he's just like literally the biggest legend in the world. So we went to Pride together, and I was pretending to be an intern in this company so that like I could get it onto the float, and so I could go to the after party afterwards. But it was really lovely. It was like having like a big brother walk you down the aisle or something. Like, it was, and I just remember like those moments of allyship, like, from straight people at the time, were just so validating. Even though I don't think you should seek validation from your straight friends if you're queer. Like, that's such a heteronormative mindset to have. But at the time, that is the mindset I had. I was 18, I was 19, like, I was young. I was living in a world that was just so, and it was a world that was so guide railed by this like straight mentality, this heteronormative community. So once I started feeling that level of acceptance, that level of validation, it definitely opened up my world a lot more. And I thought I was fully fledged, flaming, you know, ready to go, proud gay man living in Argentina, then living in Miami, then living in New York. And then it was only when I came back to Dublin, and I touched about that in the end of my piece, like, that myself and a friend of mine who's gay, Rich, were like out for a cycle, and we just kind of were talking about our romances at the time, and we were both kind of dealing with some, you know, romantic interest, and we were talking about various different things, the nuances in those romantic relationships, the things that we were kind of beginning to learn about ourselves. And we've been like really close friends for years in our college group, and it was only then that I was like, Rich, you and I have never spoken about these things before. We've never spoken about the gay experience, the literature that we've read that speaks about these things, the internalized homophobia that we experience on a daily basis to ourselves, within ourselves, all the fears, anxieties the trauma. We should definitely start talking about this more. And he was like, I know, we definitely should. And we identified that this was something that we just had never really actually kind of connected over. And then we were like, we should have a group of gay friends. Like, why don't we have that? And I think that's a huge thing a lot of gay men lack in, is like a relationship that's founded upon being gay that isn't sexual, that's like platonic. And like, it definitely, you grow into it and stuff. But what we then were like just decided to do was we kind of contacted any person that we were close to that was gay, that we already had an organic relationship with, and we're like intentionally we were like, we need to meet up every Thursday for a coffee. And we started meeting up every Thursday, myself and Rich and 4 other of our gay friends, and those Thursdays turned into Fridays, they turned into Saturdays, they turned into Sundays. We basically just became this like gaggle, as I said. And that is where I did a lot of learning about myself, a lot of learning about what it is that I want in this world as a gay man, who I want to represent, what I want to represent, what I stand for, what I need to learn about. I also started volunteering with Shout Out, which is an amazing charity in Ireland that go to schools and educational spaces and workplaces and teach people about LGBTQIAP plus terminology, nuances, the problems, the issues, tackling these issues and educating spaces. And through that, I started meeting people from the ace community, from the non-binary community, from the intersex community, people from literally so many different elements of this umbrella that I didn't know enough about. And I started to learn so much more about them. And like the past 4 years has probably been the best 4 years in terms of my queer development. And in time, like my romantic development as well, I think. So coming out is, I mean, it's been a 10-year process. Like what age am I now? 28. So yeah, 10 years. And it doesn't happen overnight. You don't just step out.
No, and I think if you bring it back to that being like a sort of symbolic or sort of another way of speaking to love, right? Like your sexuality is very much attached to love, obviously. You're always learning about love and different kinds of love and what you love and what you like, what way you want to love someone else. And I think the older you get and the more you realize, I loved this or I didn't love that, or to your point with the fuck boys or the boys that seem like the perfect boys, you love that in that moment, but like, is that really good for you long term, you know? So like your idea of your sexuality, I'd say, continues to grow, and you learn the same way as you learn about love in that way, and it changes and evolves. So and also just learning through different types, which is great. As you say, you've got your gaggle and you've got all those other, you know, friends that you spoke about as well. And they show different types of love, you know, in different facets, which I think is a beautiful way to end that story of like, there is different ways to love outside of just your sexuality or romantic relationships. And, you know, I said this before, I think we did a couple of stories before, someone spoke about the love they got from their friends too. And I mentioned my friend Abby and how, like, I'll always remember it because it was such a moment for me of like when we were away together and we just had the best time. And then it was my 30th coming up, and I got given this gift at my 30th that she'd helped organise, and it was this book called Women by Nadia Lee Cohen. And I really wanted this book, and I was like, what the fuck? Like, I honestly only thought I had thought this, that I didn't think I'd shared this like request with anyone. It's like, so how did you know? Like, I thought this was only in my head. And she was like, yeah, when we were away together, you mentioned it, and I wrote it down because I have a little notes section where I just write things down about you and things that you like and want. And just like the love I felt in that moment of like, oh my goodness, like someone would do that for me. I wouldn't even expect that. And like that, again, like this is probably why I'm also single, raised the bar to a level where I'm like, wow, like that is a type of love that like I didn't know that it was even possible to strive for, that thoughtfulness, you know. And that's where like also expectations come into play so much around love.
They
like
really do.
what is okay to expect and what's too much to expect. And yeah, like I'm at a point in my life where I'm saying no expectations, but like outrageous hope for what it could be. Like no one's gonna do what Abby did, or maybe they will, but like I will never expect that. But once you get it, it's you're really like, wow, it's the hope there that someone will love you to that extent
Yeah, I
is
know.
a nice thing to have. How they express it is a different type of thing, which I feel is more connected to expectations.
But that's for sure,
Yeah.
and I think it's just so individualistic. Like it's each person has a different way of expressing these things, and it could be by listening, it could be by gestures, it could be by an arm squeeze in the morning, it could be by.
You love your knee squeezes, I will say.
I do love a knee squeeze.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you said that twice,
it's the
and
way
I
to
was
my
like,
heart.
oh,
A knee squeeze, an arm squeeze, just a squeeze.
yeah, yeah.
Love a squeeze. But I think I'd like to get to your story.
Yes, let's do that.
And then we can have a little bit of discussion after
Yeah.
about yours and mine.
Yeah.
How did it feel kind of coming back to this? Because you were kind of saying at the beginning that you think you've changed a lot.
Yeah, so funny. So when we read this, you'll see the first person that I speak about in it
I see him.
and I bumped into him at the gym on last week, a couple of days ago, and I was gonna text him to say that we were gonna do this publicly, but then I thought, oh, I'll tell him after, like But he was like, oh, that's beautiful. Like it's your story. Like you tell your story, and I think reading back on the story, even from then, the story's changed in terms of even how I remember it. So it's actually so, like, I have a whole diary of this time, and looking back on that is even so insane to think of how much my perspective on things have changed. So that's something I've took from it. When I write, the first bit is from when I was like 19, 20, and it reads like that, the naivety in love, like what love was then. So I think reading back on it is like looking at someone else in a weird way.
Yeah, which is
But
nice.
even that is such a great, so like it's still my story,
Yeah.
but just the way I connect to it now has even changed because I wrote this a year and a half ago. So we can get into that
Cool.
after. But like,
let's get into it.
yeah.
When people talk about love, they talk about fate. The idea that we're all destined to end up with someone, our soulmate. My love story starts with the words, "From today, we become strangers." I spoke these words muffled by snot from my bed, where I'd been sitting up crying seconds before. I spoke to my boyfriend, Luke, who stood defeated at the bottom of the bed. My partner of 7 years and my best friend. I'd just found out that he'd been lying to me about a girl from work. When explaining his side of the story, he told me something that made my heart sink. They had apparently drunkenly acknowledged there was something between them, and she'd asked if there was any way they could be together. His response to this was, "Not yet." "Nothing else happened, I promise," he pleaded, but the sentence struck me. If not yet, then when? I thought. If we were the loves of each other's lives, then there was no when. That was it, right? And so, in that moment, I realised that maybe I wasn't his soulmate, and I was just someone for now. Soon after, he began packing a bin bag full of clothes while I stayed on the bed with the covers over my face until I could hear the door slowly open and reluctantly shut. I came up for air and looked at the empty hangers in our shared closet. All I could hear were birds singing from outside next to the sound of my own obnoxiously loud heartbeat. I was alone for the first time in my life. This left me unable to move from the cocoon of my bed for several days, paralysed by the prospect of taking any new steps alone. Then one morning, one by one, I scooted my legs out from under the snugness of the covers and pressed the soles of my feet onto the cold wooden floorboards below. I determinedly stood up and began walking physically and metaphorically into a new phase of my life. The first protocol, which I had absolutely no doubt was needed. It was the shower. Luke and I first met when I was studying in Newcastle. We both went to the same club every Saturday. I was standing in the balcony outside when I noticed him from the corner of my eye, standing against the wall smoking a cigarette. He leant over to me and said in a thick Leeds accent, "My friend likes your mate, but he has a girlfriend. What do you think?" I said, "I think you're a prick." Then he asked if I was from Londonderry. "It's Derry, you dick," I shouted. He laughed to himself as I made my way back into the club with a scowl on my face. "You'll never believe the cheek of that guy," I said to my friend. "Kind of fit though," she said. Being hot was never the main draw for me. Being nice was. People didn't tend to like nice guys, but I did. Nice was nice for me. But he was kind of fit. The next day I got a Facebook request from a random person. Well, well, well. It was the Londonderry dickhead Luke. He'd done the classic Facebook hunt for me in the club tagged pictures and followed me. He sent me a few messages asking to meet up, and I said no. The next week back at the club, there he was again, and then the following weeks. Just one drink, he said. He wore me down, and as a skin student with a drinking habit, who was I to say no to a drink? One drink led to many shots of tequila, and us recreating the Pulp Fiction dance, which in those days to an indie kid was as good as proposing. Then we kissed, and that was my cue to exit. I ran out of the club in my 6-inch heels and tight polka dot skirt to safety. He texted me the next day saying, "Do you remember our kiss last night?" "No," I said. I was lying. "I'm calling him Nice Luke," my friend said. "I'm not too sure he's all that nice," I said, still unconvinced. That night, we went to a new bar in town, and when we walked in, the first person I spotted was Luke. "What are you doing here?" I said in shock. Again, he laughed. "I don't know. What are you doing here?" he said, back in a mocking Irish accent. As the night went on, we got continually closer until again I felt the urge to run. I ran out of the club and into a taxi. The taxi man took me back to my apartment and asked for the taxi fare. Shit. I'd left my purse in my friend's coat, so I asked if I could go into the apartment to get some money. "No, miss," he said. "Well, how am I supposed to pay for you?" He locked the doors. Back we go. "What? Back to the club? Why drive me all the way back to the club?" Sure enough, the taxi driver took me back and dropped me off at the front door. "Cheers," I said, disorientated about what had just happened and his logic. I turned towards the club doors, and lo and behold, I saw Luke coming out of the club. "Where did you go?" he said. I went to explain, but instead sighed, shrugged my shoulders, and said, "Fancy walking me home?" Shout out to the taxi man, as from that evening, we fell in love.
Oh.
Luke had a very soft heart. I loved how his curly hair would always flop over his face. He had big shoulders that swayed while he danced. When I'd make a joke, he'd let out an honest laugh, which I knew was only between us. One day, we were together, and I heard the lyrics of a song in the background. I hear it all in the center of my heart. You're the love of my life, the life of my life. A year and a half later, we moved to Amsterdam hand in hand, transitioning from our early to late 20s. We grew up together. Throughout the day, we'd work hard to try and establish ourselves in our new careers, and in the evening, we'd sprint home to come back to our sanction together. There was truly no one else I'd rather be with. His laid-back attitude kept me grounded, and in the mundane moments, we were always laughing. Although a small observation began to become more pervasive in our dynamic. Luke generally struggled to share his deeper thoughts with me. His rationale was that he was afraid of what I might think of them, that I'd judge him. He'd look at me some days and just stare. "What?" I'd say. "Nothing," he'd reply. Sometimes I'd stare at him sleeping and just want to crawl into his brain and see what he thought about life, us, and ultimately me, as I could never really say I was certain. I was petrified he'd leave me one day. As the years went on, the pressure of my insecurities and his fear of confrontation turned into unnecessary lies. The lies were discovered when turned into ongoing resentment. The laughter became tainted with sly digs. His people-pleasing turned into choosing others over me. Our love had turned into codependency, and we'd both lost belief in ourselves and blamed each other. I told myself he lacked integrity and not to trust him. I wanted to run again, but couldn't see a life without him, so I wrote a letter to him as nothing else seemed to work. The letter was a love letter. It said a lot, but finished with this. I want us to let it all go. The anxiety about what has happened in the past. The fear and paralysis about moving towards the future. For us to be Luke and Rebekah again. A team who will do everything in our power to make this work. Because deep down we do love each other more than anyone else in the world. Are you in? A few months later, I was sitting in my apartment alone. I'd found out my neighbours had COVID. My work had shut down because I could have spread it to all my co-workers. Luke was gone. Not only was my world ending, it seemed the whole world was ending too. My life was one big, dramatic tragedy. In losing what felt like everything, after a few weeks of settling into my new reality, I realised I'd lost not just physical weight, but an emotional weight too, which was unexpected. The one of feeling inadequate. All the lies had really made me question my worth. The moment I'd wake up, I'd painfully analyse myself to make excuses for why maybe he'd leave me or choose someone else and why it was justified. Then one day, for the first time in a long time, I started to speak kinder to myself and try to heal the damage I'd inflicted on the person I used to flinch at when I saw them in the mirror. I spoke to my granddad Jerry every day through COVID and began to laugh again. He became my best friend. However, without fail, every night I'd wake up in a panicked sweat because there was no one next to me. I told myself I never wanted to need anyone else this badly again, and a wall went up. But then, so did my Hinge profile, as I decided after 7 months it was time to start dating again. Quickly, I met Alex, another Englishman. On our first date, he made a toast to integrity, he said. I nearly spat my drink out. I wrote a list of qualities I wanted in my next relationship, and integrity was number 1 on my list. Alex gave me hope, which I fell hard for to start. However, over time, the voice in my head took over and whispered, do not trust him. We'd be having an intimate chat and he'd say, why can't you look at me in the eye? Vulnerability wasn't something I was willing to show again. One day, my granddad rang me for a daily catch-up. He'd been struggling with endless health issues, and I was set to move back to Belfast in June to live with him and hopefully help him get better. His voice that day was different, almost like the wind had knocked out of him. He told me he'd had enough of the pain and it was time to go, but if I ever saw a Robin, that it would be him. Please know, we can get you better. I know it's been rough, but don't leave me. We need you. I need you. Not yet, I said. I rang an ambulance even though he asked me not to. He died a few hours later. I remember screaming when I heard and my housemate running in, as she'd never heard a sound like that. To say I've never felt pain like that, I'd lost another love in my life. From then I decided the only option to save my heart was to be alone, and that there was no such thing as fate. A while later, I started to date a guy called Emmett, who, to the relief of my parents, was Irish.
Hey.
A real pivot from all Englishmen. Cycling to the date, I had a thought. This could be the love of your life, which I quickly squashed. I outright told him I didn't want anything serious. He told me that he was the same and wanted to be independent. Perfect, I thought. And so we began a non-serious friend, but more than friends, casual situationship. One day, I was back in Belfast for Easter and in my granddad's house looking at old photos. We went there every Easter, so I wanted to do it one more time before everything was boxed up. I sat in his chair and said to my sister, I'm sorry Grandad didn't get to know I was casually seeing Emmett, because he'd have really liked him. Later that day, I was waiting in the airport on the flight home to Amsterdam, and Emmett sent me a random video from his hometown. It was of a robin. I got goosebumps. Why did you send me this? He responded, I don't really know, I just wanted to. I'd never told him what my granddad had said about the robin, and I didn't tell him then either. As time continued, Emmett taught me what actual care and love was. He would take time to sit and listen to me speak and me to him. He'd say he admired me beyond anything else for how I thought about the world, and his way always fascinated and inspired me. He'd bring me cups of tea in bed in the morning, and I would bring him chocolate mousse in the evening. He showed me that touch is more powerful than sex. I called him Skunk because he had bits of grey in his hair and beard, and he'd call me Furby because he said I looked like a Furby, which is admittedly strangely accurate. I started to soften a bit, and we decided to go on away together. I wrote this down on our trip. My resistance seems to be fading away at last. I woke up with Emmett and looked at his face, and in the dark haze of waking from dreaming, his face looked like Luke's face for a second. For years, I remembered looking at Luke and thinking, this is my person's face. Seeing Luke and Emmett immediately made me sad and reminded me of the love I really had for him that was lost, and why saying goodbye was so hard. Now seeing Emmett's face, I know this is the person who is supposed to be staring back at me. I've always wanted the robin sign to be true, but at the same time was too hurt to let myself fall for it. But now, with no force, just patience, I do believe I'm in love with him. I never told Emmett any of that, and we eventually broke up. I wasn't ready. I still couldn't surrender to what felt like fate again, because of the damage it had done before. It was bad timing. He unknowingly said goodbye on my granddad's birthday.
Eventually, to distract myself from all the heaviness I've just offloaded onto everyone that's listening, I decided to get back on the apps and had a date with a musician. The perfect rebound. We planned for a Friday evening where I was to meet him at a bar with a few of his friends. When I walked in, his best friend was sitting beside him. His best friend was the girl that Luke had lied to me about from his work all those years ago. I hadn't seen her since, and when I did, I strangely felt nothing. I was proud of how far I'd come from my bed that day 2 years ago, and how I could trust that no matter what, after time, I could let anything go and be okay. The date ended with a blind cat and a piano, which I'll leave for another time. When people talk about love, honestly, their stories usually aren't a simple, clear-cut, happy ever after. They have complexities, ever-evolving, and sometimes contradictory emotions. Feelings that are unshakably real in the moment, and yet on reflection read a different story. Love is happiness and pain, life and also death. Tiny births and huge deaths, all bundled into one term. My ex. We cannot simplify love down to a story, a love song, a poem, or a colour. Even my story doesn't scratch the surface of my story. My story may not be Luke, Alex, or Emmett's story. My story now isn't even my own story, reading back. What I can say, without doubt, is that I cannot predict or control what is next in love for me, but I have learned not to try to control, force, or resist it anymore. I will simply leave love to write its own story for me. Wow. I love that ending. That's quite a journey that you're taking us on there, Bex. Wow.
Yeah. It was interesting. I took the took the theme and went for a 3-parter series.
Yeah.
Because I felt like each of those different love stories give me a different lesson or a different takeaway from love. And as I'm saying, even though they're exhausting or disappointing every time, it does teach you something else, even about yourself or what you want, or, different expressions of love, or different things that you look back on and realize maybe you dealt with love in a way that wasn't great even for that situation, like I will say, having a 7-year relationship start when you're 21, and like that's I said, we grew up together basically. Like that's quite a lot. Like you don't all you know is your family. Like I mention this every time, but I'm a twin, but like I've always had a person. And so there's a codependency that was just like instilled in me.
Yeah.
And so like to me I had to have a person. And so there's a lot of pressure, but because you learn that like that's the pinnacle of life, is like meeting a life partner, and that's when your life starts. Like to me I was like, right, this is the way it has to be, and this is what life's about. And then you realize that maybe these things that like you're expressing in a way at the time to each other isn't really about what that is. It's about a bigger thing. It was I feel that a lot of my struggle in that relationship, like I say, is the fear of that person leaving me.
Yeah.
Like that, having that, being like, I don't know how to live without another person was the problem. It wasn't, I don't know how to live without this person. It was like, I don't know how to live without someone.
Yeah.
And like, so I knew at some stage, for the benefit, even like we couldn't be in a relationship without me learning how to do that, because I couldn't be in a healthy relationship. That makes sense.
And then, like, there's like, I mean, we've had Molly Buckingham from Red Wine and Onion speaking.
Yes, amazing.
Yeah, if for those of you guys who haven't heard of her, she writes an amazing blog called Red Wine and Onions, and it's worth giving a follow or checking out her website, because she writes lots of excellent pieces, and she's written 2 essays about learning how to cope with being alone, and kind of spinning alone, which is often framed as a negative thing, into a positive, and understanding the kind of empowering nature of learning to be alone and on your own. Over those 2 years, it was 2 years, right? Let's say in between you being in your bed crying into your duvet and meeting the girl that created all the, well, not all, but a bit of the trauma in the first place, the torture in the first place. How much of that alone experience do you reflect on positively?
It's funny. I think it's like, when women say they give birth, like it's the most horrific experience they've ever went through, but then they do it again. Like you learn to like forget about it, but like also when you go back to it in your head, like COVID, that be like we literally broke up. I'd say like a week or two before
Oh my God.
lockdown.
Yeah.
So like it was like at that point it was like, oh shit, like I'm not just alone, like I'm alone.
I know.
Like,
I remember
yeah.
COVID just feeling like it was a period where you couldn't be more reminded that you were single if you were single during the pandemic,
Yeah.
and there was just nothing to do. There was no way of changing that.
No, and that's what I mean about like, I mean, also I think, the older you get, the less self-involved or absorbed you are. Like to me, I was like, oh, like the world's ending because my world is ending. Like there was this like sort of like, oh, like everything's crumbling. Like it's such a dramatic scale. And then it sort of let me just indulge in it in a way. And I just remember crying like to the point where like I couldn't cry. And when you're just like, okay, well here we are, and like horrible things are happening. Like it was the first time my family started to like get to a point where there was more illnesses, and it just felt really surreal, the whole experience. And at the start I would be like, I'm cooking alone, I'm eating alone, I'm watching. Everything was like, I'm using the toilet alone. Like everything was so like in my head, you're alone. But then after a while I started to go, you're cooking alone, like you're doing this. Like it was actually like, oh, it's really nice to just do it for you rather than do it like with someone else all the time.
I'm actually looking for that line in your story because when you talk about those rudimentary tasks feeling so much more alone, it's so true.
Yeah.
And like the vast majority of my relationships have been long distance, so I've experienced that feeling of separation from my partners, which everyone's experience is different, but for me definitely caused lots of feelings of like temporary loneliness, like the day that you're saying goodbye, the day you've left, and then the next couple
it's
of
the worst.
the adjustment, the 2 or 3 days when you're trying to adjust to these tasks that you were able to do on your own before they walked into your life or with them. Like even just like being on like on a metro or a subway or a tube and not having them to kind of like lean on or wrap your arm around or lie next to on the train, like literally, like the trains have never felt more lonely lately for me. And then also, well, obviously lying in bed is something, but then also just like basic things like, oh my God, it is actually one of the most existential chores. Making a fucking double bed on your own. There's nothing worse. It's like, like this is literally made for 2 people. This job is made for 2 people.
It's so true.
And it's such a reminder. It's like my least favorite thing is to do laundry because it always, well, like launder the sheets. I do often do it though. Definitely it's my least favorite part of the week when I'm single because you just don't have anyone else to share that task with. And you really pinpointed that feeling of the world feeling so lonely when you're coming out of a relationship, and in spite of the fact that the world probably isn't lonely and you're probably taking for granted that you have around 20 unread WhatsApps from your friends asking you to do things or checking in on you, seeing how you are, funny memes, that almost just goes over your head in those situations.
But it's also that thing of like being able to sit with someone and not talk. Do you know, just being able to, as you say, get affection. Like that's the thing that I've started these nails, which are amazing. I will say, because there's this weird thing where like, because I can't feel them when I touch myself. It sounds really weird. It feels like someone else touching me.
You,
But it is nice because I didn't realize. And I actually didn't realize till I met Emmett how much I love touch. Like I thought, everyone does to an extent, but I controlled myself and how much I needed it. But now that's the thing. Like I love to be like I love, my favorite thing is someone just like lying on someone and them just stroking me like as if I'm a cat.
Can I ask? So obviously all 3 men mentioned in this story are exes.
Yeah.
What's your opinion on being friends with your exes?
It's a great question. I'm friends with all my exes. Actually, pretty great friends with Alex. And he is amazing, I will say. And he was great because obviously I wasn't ready and I broke it off. And he was like, it's really hard for me because he wanted to continue, but I just want you to be happy. So if that's without me, fine. And he didn't he didn't say that in a way to like pull me back in. He genuinely meant that, and he's been through. I mean, this was years ago when we dated. He's been through me dating other people, and now he's in another relationship, and he's introduced me to her, and she's amazing, and we just have a lot of care for each other, even if it's at the detriment of each other's egos or each other's like wants, which aren't there now, but probably were at the start. And yeah, you never, also when you come out of something, you never treat them the way you should. Like sometimes it's like, you send a little text you shouldn't send, you know? And so, but we forgive each other for all those types of things and know that at the end of the day, we're all just people seeking love, and it's hard. And like, you know, and so me and him are great friends. Luke, as I said, bumped into him the other day. We've managed to build a relationship. It took much longer. But now we're good friends, and continuing to be better in that friendship. And Emmett was slightly different, I will say. But he's always known that I'm there for him if he needs me. So like that's what I love, and that's why I think what I've learned in all this is like I used to be so afraid of being abandoned. And now through all these connections, I'll call them, as well, they are little loves, but like they're all connections that I've met great people, learned great things, and care about more people. And you don't have to let that care go. You can, after time, where you can try and frame it and make it and evolve it into something else. And like they're great friendships I have now, like really, really great. Great friendships, and I know they know me intimately, and I know them intimately, so there's a bond there at a different level, even if it's not a romantic level anymore, which is great.
I think that's
what about you?
Yeah, I know, it's funny because I often have friends kind of comment and they're like, Gaff, I think it's fucking crazy that you're still friends with guys you used to date, or guys that broke your heart. I'm like, well, fundamentally there's a core friendship there, there's a core connection there. And I also, like, the first time I actually took the plunge and decided to become friends with someone I dated, it was a massive like leap of faith, really. And it was quite scary because I'd been very proud, and I'd like actually tried to do whatever I could to cut this person out of my life, and it was working. I was feeling a lot better about myself, I was feeling a lot better romantically about other people and stuff. And then we decided to become friends, and we went for like a coffee or a pint or something, and I just started to learn so much about myself through becoming friends with that person. I just saw myself in retrospect, and I was able to work on myself through making that friendship work. And it's kind of the approach I've taken to relationships, you know, moving forward. I think at the same time, like, you do need time to compartmentalize that relationship.
Yeah,
for what it was versus
time
what it
is crucial.
Become, it's also really tricky if it's like a circumstantial split. You know, if it's something based on like geographical.
Or if someone's hurt someone, like that's different. If
Exactly. There's two different reasons. Like, you know, like vast majority of my breakups have been based on like logistics, and then a few of them have been based on hurt. But actually, funnily enough, the ones that are based on logistics tend to be the ones that are based on hurt, tend to be the ones that I'm actually still friendly with, which is a weird one. I don't know. That might just be
that's one for your therapist.
Yeah. I think so too. It's a funny one. I think it's also, we're in a world where there's just so much more access to people. So like what I mean by that is if you try and cut someone out of your life, it's really hard to do that unless you actively block them on social media. But like you still get to see what your ex is up to, what they're doing. There's a lot just more connectivity. Like you like 20, 30 years ago, you didn't know that some random person from your hockey team hangs out with your boyfriend because you saw an Instagram story that they're together 2 years later, and you're like, oh, what? Like, didn't know this is another possible place that I might run into this guy, or, you know, whereas, so we just have way more exposure to our exes and what they're doing now and people that we have loved. And for that reason, I think you just have to try and let bygones be bygones and gradually build a friendship again, because it's a fundamental thing. Like, that person cared about you, that person loved you, that person had done things for you that a lot of people haven't done. And unless they really actively did something bad or malicious or mean or menacing, I think that like there is something to befriending that partner eventually in a platonic sense in the future, but it takes a lot of time, and time heals.
Yeah.
Love is timeless.
Time is funny because I will say, like, as I said, reading back on this, Emmett and I had just broke it off, I'd say a week after. Not
Before you wrote this?
Yeah.
A week after you wrote this or a week before you... No,
Oh,
a week
sorry,
before.
before.
Yeah, because
Yeah,
you've broken
yeah.
up in the story.
And so obviously I was like a little, like going through a little bit of the, you know, the initial griefy, compromisey, romanticizing time. And I don't think I was in love with him. I feel like I loved him, but I do feel like I loved certain things that he showed me that I guess I wasn't. I realized I didn't want to give up. But actually, I do think in reflection we should have just been friends. Like sometimes that's what it is.
Yeah, sometimes.
But it's funny reading it because at the time, obviously, I was saying no. Like I actually really feel like this is my person. So it's funny to, as I'm saying, you go back to these relationships and the way you look at them or feel about them change over time. So no matter the hardest heartbreak, like I do feel like the situation with Luke was like we were together 7 years. Like that was
hard.
hardcore.
There's no way of denying that. That's hard.
Was still something that like will always hurt. But like now to be able to like champion each other and like be friends with each other, like or even bump into that girl and it be, you realize that again we're all just people trying to figure it out, and that like also like finding your person's just never going to be easy. It shouldn't be.
No, it's a challenge. And it's also, it's not like I was talking about this to someone yesterday about how it's not a case of like problem solved once you find someone. It's actually a case of problems begin.
Oh God,
That's what a relationship is. It's
Yeah.
problems to solve day by day, month by month, figuring things out as you go. A lot of people think that once they've arrived at a relationship, it's an arrival. It's not. It's a departure. It's a journey.
Well, my thing now, and this was again one thing I learned from Emmett, was we listen to each other. Like everything, because one of my big things now is, well, there's a couple of things. Don't fall in love with someone's potential. That's one. Not to say people can't grow and be better, but don't go, oh, if they, you know,
Don't
they are who
fantasize.
they are.
That's good advice.
The other thing is to like always see whatever the other person's saying with the best intentions, because I think the rut that me and Luke fell into after the trust was broken, and I think that that's always the problem, is we were always like, like, is that what you mean? And once you get into a pattern with your partner of questioning whether their intentions are right or wrong, you're already done, because your partner is your teammate, and you should always, no matter what they say, even if there's a question around whether it is in a good or a bad thing, you should always go to good, because they're your person, and you should always see the best in them. And so when we would have conversations of like where there was a bit of a misunderstanding, as soon as it was explained, we went, oh yeah, there was no, but you
Yeah.
sure you didn't mean? Are you sure you did? And this and that, and but you said it was like very much like, oh, okay, that's how you intended it. No worries. And that's something I've learned to take into also friendships.
I think I would kind of wanted to ask you before we wrapped up was, obviously comparing heartbreaks is a reductive thing to do, but when you lost your grandfather, that feeling of loss, does it compare at all to the feeling of loss of romantic love?
Well, I did say it's the worst heartache I've ever had. Like, I feel like I'm gonna cry talking about
That's
that
okay.
one.
Lean into that if you want.
Because he I don't know, like there's something in a family member, because you're connected through blood as well, so there's this deep bond. Not always, but I think once, if you do find a person in your family that connects with you in that way, that's like generational, you know, like it's something that like bonds you between anything. And like I had a lot of his traits in a way that like are just passed on through being born, so it is just your being is reflected in this person. So there was just this thing that was like unspoken between us and our connection, that you don't seek out, it just is. And getting to know him more, like I would talk to him over the phone, and if I couldn't see him, he would just remind me, he would be my best friend. Like we would just, if he was our age, we'd hang out and we would be like really close. Like he was so funny and had my humor, which I think is very hard to find. Like if you get the humor with someone, and he just he just loved me. Like, he just really wanted to know everything about what was happening genuinely. Also, how it was taken from me so quickly, even though he was like, really, if we looked at him, he was like the Terminator. He had like so many things wrong with him that you were like, how are you alive? But I think I thought I was going to get that time with him in that moment, and I didn't get it. So it's that pulling of the rug.
Can I ask, and we don't have to go into too much detail about this, but you kind of speak about this relationship, how it started to develop as an adult. Did you not have that relationship with him when you were younger, or was it more of a case that like you got to know each other as adult to adult, and a new relationship was born out of that?
Yeah, I think it was more that, because I think also I was really close to my nanny, but then she got dementia, and so as a focus, you know, it was that. But there was this point in COVID where actually he was alone for the first time, I was alone for the first time, and we had also then a relatability through that, like that heartache and that loneliness, and yeah, we just like started to get to know each other as people rather than like also the dynamic
The
of like
hierarchical,
grandfather granddaughter, and yeah, so like that was just, that to me was a relationship I'll never get back, but that I yeah, like he was like a love of my life, let's say.
That's so beautifully special. Like that could be a play, like a granddaughter and a grandfather suddenly realizing their synergy is
Yeah.
that level of loneliness and becoming best pals through it. I don't know, it's a dynamic shift of whatever a family conventional relationship of grandfather and grandchild is to actually just friends on a level playing field. It's quite unique that you had that, and something to cherish for sure.
And I love to talk about him like this, because like that time going back, I was going to record all the stories. He was so smart and as well, and I didn't get to do that. And there's like, so I will say to everyone that has like a grandparent or a parent, is like, take your opportunity to actually listen or record or write down those stories, because once they go, it is gone.
Yeah.
And that's something I really regret. Like I can't do justice on that man, you know. Like also he was a bit of a dickhead sometimes. Like let's not, he's not a saint. Like
No.
he was human in his own way. A lot of people will tell you that, but there's something in that too that I loved as well.
Of course, the
So
imperfection.
and the whole thing with Emmett and that connection was because he was like, when are you coming home to Ireland? You know, like he really wanted me to come home, and there was a coming home almost in dating Emmett, because I'd like not rejected my Irishness, but kind of moved away from it because I'd moved to England and I'd met Luke and I was able to reinvent myself a bit, and then moved to Amsterdam. So I didn't really connect with my roots in that way. And I know that was always something that he would have loved. But like the little thing with the Robin, again, I don't know how much I believe in signs or fate or any of that stuff, but sometimes you can't ignore it, and it's nice to lean into it, you know?
Completely. It's fate.
Yeah.
Maybe, in a weird way.
Maybe, yeah.
You say at the beginning that, what is it, that love is, let me get it. You say at the beginning that when people talk about love, they talk about fate, and
Yeah.
they might not necessarily say that love and fate are the same, but they sometimes do go hand in hand.
But do you believe in fate? Do you want to believe in fate, let's say?
I believe in serendipity is a thing. But I think fate is serendipitous. I don't know if it's predestined. My dad proposed to my mum on the same bench that my grandfather, his father, proposed to my grandmother, his mum.
Wow. Did he know that?
No.
Whoa, that's, yeah.
And is that fate? Or is it serendipity? Or is it a deeply ingrained knowing that maybe he was told once and pulled it out of the bag by accident? I don't know. Like, that could be fate. I mean, they've been together for 42 years.
Well done. I mean, that's
Yeah.
a lot. I mean, we've covered a lot in this.
We have.
I actually would love, I think when we launch this, I would love questions. Let's, you know, get people's questions in about what they think about love or anything they want to ask more about the stories. But
We also would love to hear from our listeners how they feel about the format of people sharing their stories and reading each other's stories out. Is that something that is easy to listen to? Is it something that you would like to do yourself?
Yeah.
If so, do write to us. We're always looking for people who want to come on the podcast as guests. You can choose to bring someone that you know or that you admire if they're interested in joining you.
or talk to us.
Or talk to us. Maybe we
Yeah.
can swap a story with you too. But that was In Their Shoes by Seanchoíche, and we look forward to you tuning into the next episode.
Lots of love.
Join us next time to walk in more people's shoes, hear stories around different themes, and have more great discussions. Don't forget to hit subscribe, and we look forward to you joining us next time to connect through the power of shared storytelling.